From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Ijoma Unyato.
Hello and welcome. Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 rules out possibility of another lockdown in the face of rising cases of coronavirus in the country. Director General of Nigeria Center for Disease Control agrees with critics of proposed infectious diseases bill, insists states must be allowed to handle their health emergencies on day 2 of the public hearing. President Muhammadu Buhari receives report on Economic Sustainability Committee, asks ECOWAS Commission to come up with post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan in a virtual meeting. It's free-for-all at the Kaduna State House of Assembly as lawmakers impeach Deputy Speaker. And US President Donald Trump authorizes sanction against International Criminal Court over the court's investigation of American troops in Afghanistan. Plus, we'll have business, sports, news from Abuja, the FCT, and later on news from our studios in London.
On Business News tonight, Minister of State for Budget and National Planning sets up technical group for medium-term national development plan and 2050 development agenda.
On Sports News tonight, federal government requests 1 month to assess the current lockdown easing measures before deciding on the resumption of sporting activities.
And from the nation's capital, Senate passes 2020 revised budget, jacks up 10.5 trillion naira proposed by the executive as analysts and lawmakers appraise the 9th assembly in the last 1 year.
The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has ruled out the possibility of a total lockdown, even in the face of rising cases in the country. The chairman of the task force and secretary to the government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, affirmed this at the daily press conference in Abuja. And that's despite Nigeria recording 663 new cases of COVID-19 on Tuesday, its highest ever in a single day.
I have no choice.
Confirmed cases of COVID-19 continue to be on the rise in Nigeria, especially since the beginning of the gradual ease of lockdown. This situation is now a source of concern for the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, even as it insists that recommendations for another lockdown will not be an option.
To go back to a total lockdown must be taken in the context of what do we desire to achieve after we've locked down for about 5 weeks and seen how we fared. You can't move forward and begin to move backwards again. In terms of strategic implementation of our policies, we might not be looking towards that direction. But we might be looking at how to strengthen what we have put in place, how to ensure compliance and all other non-pharmaceutical interventions that we have put in place.
Even though the task force insists that the rising number of confirmed cases is not unusual, the task force restates the need for individual responsibility.
In Nigeria, the proportion of confirmed cases that is symptomatic compared to asymptomatic is about 40 to 60, respectively. Therefore, the cheapest and easiest way to protect oneself is with a mask. But we must also make clear that that alone does not do the trick. You must still maintain other measures that are advised: distancing, hand washing, and respiratory hygiene.
As we have eased the restrictions that we instituted across the country, and our states ease those restrictions, we have expected the numbers to increase. Whether that increase continues or not depends on our collective action, like we've always said. And sometimes these numbers are necessary to remind us of that reality.
The Minister of State for Education also informs the gathering about the new directives for schools that are running foreign curricula in Nigeria.
A few of the private schools that have that content, they are tailored really to satisfy the ability of some of the children of expats who live here, so that when they return to their countries, they'll be able to rejoin their own school system. And if such schools are able to host online classes for the curriculum that they operate, and they choose to use the period to cover their syllabus, it is permitted.
The task force says the number of cases will continue to increase as testing capacity improves. And as it rules out the possibility for another lockdown, the need for individuals to take responsibility and stop the spread of the virus cannot be overemphasized.
I don't know how that policy came about.
And before the media briefing today, the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 asked the National Assembly to begin the process of developing a legislative framework in preparation for future health occurrences. Mr. Boss Mustafa was speaking during an interaction between the PTF and the House of Representatives Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19. He also told the lawmakers that issues of mental health would have to be taken seriously now and after COVID-19, and he believes this could be responsible for the surge in gender violence and rape cases in the country. He also insists it's untrue that any returnee had been made to pay for their own accommodation during the mandatory 14-day isolation period. Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has asked the ECOWAS Commission to come up with an economic recovery plan to help member states recover from the economic devastation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The president made this call at a virtual meeting with the president of the Commission, Jean Cassibrou, in his capacity as the ECOWAS COVID-19 champion. President Buhari's Special Assistant on Media and Publicity, Mr. Garba Shehu, confirms in a statement that the president agreed to provide logistic support to enable the region receive and distribute medical equipment using Abuja as a hub for the distribution. According to President Buhari, the pandemic is yet to reach its peak in the sub-region, and he warned against laxity in the fight against it. Also today, the president received the economic sustainability reports from the committee that was set up to chart a course on revamping the nation's economy following the COVID-19 pandemic. The committee was established by President Buhari and chaired by the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, with some federal ministers as members. According to the Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, the committee had worked on various ways to support each sector of the economy.
The committee, chaired by Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo, was inaugurated at the end of March 2020. It was a child of necessity to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. The 18-member committee held several meetings and consultations, the result of which has been presented. In the report are several recommendations.
We've also recommended support for local production and manufacturing of all that is possible, including technology applications, software, shoes, garments, steel fabrication, ceramics, and furniture, with the required capital and essential machinery. We've also recommended the provision of ample support for the informal sector through low-interest loans and by easing procedures for registration, for licensing, for obtaining permits, etc.
VP Osinbajo harps on faithful implementation.
The key to the success of this plan is undoubtedly implementation, making sure that we execute the plan faithfully and working in collaboration with each other.
President Muhammadu Buhari, who is pleased with the work done, believes the recommendations can serve as a national plan.
As we go forward, we must chart a new course and remain steadfast. I believe the priorities contained in this plan present a practical way of achieving our desire of a truly competitive economy that can support our people and secure our future.
He again praised the resilience of Nigerians, but urges caution.
I must salute the Nigerians for their resilience in adapting to the realities of the COVID-19 effects. It is clear that businesses face the prospect of collapse or crippling losses. So, we must prepare for difficult times while government continues to seek ways of supporting businesses and industry.
The report, titled Bouncing Back, the Nigerian Economic Sustainability Plan, is a blueprint that will come against the shocks and jolts of a heavily impacted global economy. How much bounce and how soon are the big questions for now. Ibrahim Adra, Channels Television News.
In the meantime, the Senate has increased the revised 10.5 trillion naira 2020 budget proposed by the executive by 301 billion naira and passed the 10.810 trillion naira revised budget. The 301 billion naira added to the proposal by the executive is as a result of increases in capital expenditure to 2.488 trillion naira and recurrent expenditure jerked up from the earlier proposed 4.928 trillion to 4.942 trillion naira.
This is one of very important legislations and intervention. The country is waiting for this, and with this, we have joined our colleagues in the House who passed the bill yesterday. We have done this, but we have other things waiting for us in relation to this. We are supposed to ensure that we oversight on these projects, and more especially when we had to borrow money to fund some of these projects. It is very crucial that we ensure that there is value for money. Every project that is mentioned here should be implemented appropriately and accordingly. So all our committees, our standing committees, should ensure that we continue to carry out our oversights.
The 9th Assembly is 1 year old, and for analysts, the last 1 year was a mixed bag of highs and lows. While some commend the National Assembly for its prompt passage of the 2020 budget, others argue that the legislature did not play its constitutional role of oversight. Our correspondent Linda Akigbe reports.
It's 1 year since the 9th Assembly was inaugurated on June 11, 2019. Senators Ahmed Lawan and Ovi Omagigi were elected as Senate and Deputy Senate President, while Mr. Femi Bajabiamila was elected as Speaker and Idris Wase emerged Deputy Speaker unopposed. In the last 1 year, the Senate considered a total of 450 bills. In the House of Representatives, as at June 10, 2020, 850 bills have been introduced and 36 bills passed.
I think the Senate should be judged by its achievements and how it makes laws and passes motions to impact on the lives of Nigerians.
Public analyst Sesu Akume is not satisfied with the legislative intervention so far by the 9th Assembly.
I think the 9th National Assembly has performed extremely poorly in the last 1 year. They've also done very poorly by bringing obnoxious bills that annoy and irritate and do not show that they represent us. For instance, I'll give example of 4 of such bills. One is the social media bill that sought to stifle our voices. The other one was the hate speech bill.
Social media bill, a generator bill, a rape bill. Anybody can come with some certain bill. By the time you are reading your second reading, even you will know that this bill is not flying.
One of the early concerns raised by observers of the legislature was the likelihood of a 9th Assembly not asserting its independence and acting as a rubber stamp to the executive. Critics based this concern on how the major principal officers of a National Assembly emerged, particularly as it appeared that they were personally handpicked by the party and by extension the presidency.
The House of Representatives has never been a rubber stamp, and it is not a rubber stamp.
Is it not better to have a harmonious, symbiotic relationship than the combustible one, where things will not move?
The Ninth Assembly scored a huge win by passing the national budget on December 2019, returning the country to a one-year budget cycle, an accomplishment not achieved by previous parliaments in recent times. But COVID-19 has disrupted the global economy, prompting the executive and parliament to return to the drawing board and revise the 2020 budget. But some Nigerians are concerned about the appropriations in the revised budget and the response of a National Assembly to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Citizens. And as we speak, the National Assembly has not done enough to support citizens to overcome this crisis, whether it is in monitoring and oversighting the very limited palliative measures that the executive is executing, that is very ineffectively executing.
The National Assembly has 3 more years before its expiration, and Nigerians would want to see a federal legislature step up to its constitutional role of checking the executive, efficiently oversighting government agencies, and passing critical legislations such as the Petroleum Industry Bill, Police Reform Bill, and expedite the amendment of the Electoral Act. Linda Akibe, Channels Television News.
In part 2, after the break, Nigeria Governors Forum asks states to domesticate relevant gender-based protection laws to stop cases of rape and violence against women. Plus, it's a free-for-all at the Kaduna State House of Assembly as lawmakers impeach Deputy Speaker. That's all coming up in a moment. Do join us again. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 on Channels Television, coming to you live from Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 rules out possibility of another lockdown in the face of rising cases of coronavirus in the country. Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control agrees with critics of proposed infectious diseases bill, insists states must be allowed to handle their health emergencies on day 2 of public hearing. President Muhammadu Buhari receives report on Economic Sustainability Committee, asks ECOWAS Commission to come up with post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan in virtual meeting. It's free-for-all at the Kaduna State House of Assembly as lawmakers impeach Deputy Speaker. And US President Donald Trump authorizes sanction against International Criminal Court over the court's investigation of American troops in Afghanistan. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Do subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser, or you can download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android, Fire TV, and Roku as well. As part of the commemoration of Nigeria's Democracy Day, President Muhammadu Buhari will make a broadcast to the nation tomorrow, Friday, June the 12th at 7 a.m. This is confirmed in a statement from the President's Special Advisor on Media and Publicity, Mr. Femi Adesina. Television and radio stations, as well as other electronic media outlets, are asked to hook up to the network services of the Nigerian Television Authority and Radio Nigeria, respectively, for the broadcasts. Economies around the globe are struggling to survive because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Nigeria's economy is not left out. The number of confirmed cases has already exceeded 13,000 in Nigeria, while the federal government is gradually easing the lockdown on the economy. Our next report takes a look at how the government is repositioning the economy to boost resilience beyond the health crisis.
Projections from the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries show that Nigeria could lose up to $20 billion from crude oil sales. This represents about 90% of the nation's exports as crude oil prices continue to fall due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The non-oil sector, including the aviation industry, hospitality sector, small and medium enterprises, among others, have also experienced a downturn during the pandemic. In February, the International Monetary Fund revised the projection for the 2020 gross domestic product growth rate for Nigeria from 2.5% to 2%. Experts believe these indices could spur government on how to address its revenue receipts from oil.
What we cannot control is what happens to global oil prices. The good news is that as we speak, it has climbed above $30 per barrel, and budget has been reviewed to $25 per barrel. We can only hope that with the cuts we have here and there, it will have meaningful implication. And it's not just the price that matters, output also matters.
Besides the drop in the prices of crude, the pandemic has led to disruptions in global trade and investments. The question is, how can government get the economy working while the pandemic remains?
How do you conserve resources at the level of the household by pushing back on payments that they have to make, and then pushing more resources, that is preventing unemployment or scaling down unemployment, large-scale redundancy? Government is holding their workers and paying them, but how about the private sector? There are issues there.
Government is aware of the challenges caused by the pandemic, and the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, leads the Economic Sustainability Committee, which has some governors and the Minister of Finance as members.
Mr. President has approved that the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning should engage with the Central Bank of Nigeria to agree on a debt and interest moratorium for states and for the federal government on CBN-funded loans in order to create fiscal space for the states and the federation.
The states are not left out in the stimulus plan. The World Bank is planning to disburse $1.5 billion to states by September as part of economic stimulus to cushion the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is part of the financial institution's proposed package for immediate fiscal relief for the federal government.
Let's get a bit more perspective on the economy as we celebrate Democracy Day in the COVID-19 era. Joining me live from Abuja is the former Director General of the Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Chijioke Ikechukwu. Thanks a lot for joining us on the News at 10.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Now, some say the verdict on the economy, at least in the past couple of years or in this period that we're looking at, is long on intention and enthusiasm, but a bit short on results. Is that a fair assessment, in your opinion?
We have gone through the lockdown, and everybody's so enthusiastic about starting business again. But you see, the effect of the lockdown is having a great adverse effect on the economy, and it's still going to continue having the same adverse effect for a reasonable time. That becomes necessary for governments through all the various interventions, through the stimulus packages they are giving to Nigerians in various sectors, to continue in that regard and to ensure that the effect of the lockdown does not have a heavy adverse effect on Nigerians. So I think if the right things are done, the adverse effect is not going to be so high.
All right, we just looking at the economy generally in the last couple of years, obviously we're celebrating Democracy Day, even though we're in a COVID-19 era. What's your assessment generally?
The economy is expected to do better than what it is doing today. Unfortunately, the country is so bedeviled by so many things that are affecting us adversely. Before the COVID-19 era, you realize that we were faced with a very low price of oil, which was caused by the international politics going on in that sector. And shortly after that, then we encountered the shutdown from COVID-19. And all these things have actually affected all our production capacities locally and outside this place. A lot of revenue has been lost. Each time we talk about revenue, we usually look at the revenue coming from oil that has been depleted by the shutdown. But we also have to look at the revenue that is not coming from taxes. If companies are shut down for such a reasonable time, you see, what it means is that they're not going to be paying taxes, and so revenue coming from FIRS is also affected adversely. And if all these revenues are affected, you can see that we have entered a situation where we may not have so much solution because whatever that is causing the revenue shortage is obviously beyond the control of the economy.
All right, finally now, to the average Nigerian out there, whenever we talk about the economy, we're looking at figures, and some say that a lot of it is paper profit rather than in their pockets. In terms of bold steps to invest in people and to keep their businesses afloat in the next couple of years that we're looking at, what should be the first thing that the government should be looking at quickly?
The government has tried to bring out some stimulus packages for the small and medium enterprises. But to tell you the truth, I have not seen the full implementation of that particular policy. I know we've been having some assurances from CBN all the time, but the small and medium entrepreneurs have not received anything. Many of them have filled forms, many of them have done all the necessary things they're supposed to do, but these monies have not hit their accounts. Just the other day, I read that anybody who has not received his own after 48 hours of filling his bank details should report. And of course, they put a number on the papers. But I can tell you, I expect that they should match action with whatever thing that has been said. We haven't seen that yet happening, and so the stimulus package that is supposed to happen, I don't know whether it is after this particular year that the people will start having stimulus. People need to have it because in various countries of the world, we know that stimulus packages have been paid into people's accounts and companies' accounts, and we need to have ours right now. We don't have to wait till tomorrow.
All right. Former Director General of the Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Chijioke Ikechukwu, thanks a lot for joining us on the News at 10 tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And when the News at 10 returns, Minister of State for Budget and National Planning sets up technical group for medium-term National Development Plan and 2050 Development Agenda. That will be on Business News. Do join us again. Welcome back to the News at 10. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission says it's recovered assets worth over 980 billion naira, as well as an array of non-monetary assets, including private jets, hotels and oil vessels in the last 5 years. This assertion was made by the Anti-Graft Agency's acting chairman, Mr. Ibrahim Magu, at a news conference in Abuja to mark Nigeria's Democracy Day, which comes up tomorrow. He also notes that the Commission has successfully prosecuted 2,240 cases involving individuals and corporate bodies.
As you all know, ladies and gentlemen, in your regular reporting, the EFCC is not only ahead, it is clearly so. We are on course in all cases we are prosecuting. Our scorecard in the areas of conviction is 2,240 in the last 5 years. We have recovered assets in the excess of 980 billion naira, and quite a large array of non-monetary assets like the properties, estate, private jet, oil vessel, filling stations, schools, hotels, trucks, and other automobiles, jewelries, plazas, shopping malls, electronics, among others. The EFCC is committed to our democratic project as a nation. The anti-corruption agenda of President Muhammad Buhari is real. There's no doubt about that. It's robust and yielding visible results. That's why we are running helter-skelter. We will not relent on our assigned mandate. Lastly, as we bask in euphoria of Democracy Day, parents, guardians, and other role models across the country should assume more practical roles in shaping behaviors and worldviews of their world.
The EFCC is not done yet, as it's vowed to commence the prosecution of the former governor of Imo State, Senator Rochas Okorocha, when it concludes its ongoing investigation of alleged financial misappropriation against him. The Commission says in a statement that it had already returned over 2.7 billion naira from the 7.9 billion naira recovered from different bank accounts and assets belonging to Senator Okorocha to the state for payment of workers' salaries and pensions. The agency adds that of the figure already returned to Imo State for the payment of salaries, the immediate past governor of the state, Emeka Ehedioha, got 2.5 billion naira, while the current governor has also received 514 million naira. But Senator Okorocha is not taking the EFCC's prosecution threat lying down, as his office insists that the anti-graft agency never recovered 7.9 billion naira or any other amount of money from him. In a statement, Senator Okorocha's spokesman challenged the EFCC to prove its claims by publishing details of the bank accounts where the money was found. He says the Commission should also publish details of the properties allegedly recovered from the lawmaker or retract its story on his investigation. Let's cross over to Abuja now, and here's Ibrahim Adra. Ibrahim.
Hello, Ijoma. Thank you for joining us here in Abuja. Participants at the second day of the public hearing on the Infectious Diseases Bill have also picked holes in the document. One of them is the Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, Chike Ihekweazu, who also agreed that the bill gives too much powers to the office of the DG of the NCDC. Mr. Ihekweazu argues that states should be allowed to handle health emergencies themselves. Our correspondent Terry Kumi has a report.
It's day 2 of the public hearing on the Infectious Diseases Bill. At least 50 stakeholders have been invited to make presentations, including the Nigeria Center for Disease Control and the Minister of Health.
And this proposed bill...
And just like the first day, the submissions are the same.
Flowing from the contentious clauses that we have identified and the recommended amendments made in the reviewed version of the bill, the CSO community submits that if this bill is to pass in its current state, it will create more problems than any intended good. It is to this end that we recommend that the contentious clauses be expunged or reviewed.
If you look at the powers given to the Director General, they are powers that seem to be draconian and applicable in a military regime. The finality of the decisions of the Director General seem to suggest it is outside the jurisdiction of courts.
We have also observed that the bill in reference was copied as a copy and paste from the Singaporean Infectious Disease Act of 1977. In our opinion, this lacks the local context that is peculiar to us as Nigerians, and we do not align completely with the copy and paste ideology of a Singaporean bill, which does not reflect the International Health Regulatory Act.
It's the turn of the NCDC, and the Director General sums up the controversial bill like this.
The bill in its current form does not establish an adequate human rights safeguard. And the emphasis on the use of force to achieve the objectives may exacerbate these existing challenges, generate public resistance, and undermine the efforts of NCDC and other competent authorities to manage outbreaks of infectious diseases. Finally, NCDC also thinks that the bill, as drafted, gives excessive powers to the Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. These powers need to be carefully evaluated for the future of our country.
Even the Minister of Health, whom the bill also supposedly favors, gives it a shake of the head.
The prayer of the Federal Ministry of Health that this memorandum will be useful to assist the committee in considering amendments of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control and Prevention Act of 2018, an amendment of the Quarantine Act of 1926 in place of this infectious disease bill of 2020. This is the position of the entire Federal Ministry of Health.
The public hearing wraps up, and this time the question is it back to the drawing board for the House of Representatives, or will the bill be thrown out and maybe a more coordinated one formulated. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Terry, thanks a lot. Chaos ensued today in the Kaduna State House of Assembly as members exchanged blows over the impeachment of the Deputy Speaker, Mukhtar Hazo. Following the impeachment, the lawmakers elected the member representing Kauru constituency, Mr. Isaac Auta, as the new Deputy Speaker. Before Mr. Hazo's impeachment, there were speculations of plans by some members, led by the Deputy Speaker, to impeach the Speaker, Yusuf Zailani.
It's another day in the life of the legislature. Outside the Kaduna State House of Assembly, things appeared normal on Thursday, with security details ushering in staff and visitors into the complex. But inside the chamber itself, something different was brewing, as lawmakers file in for the day's legislative business. First, an urgent matter has to be attended to, and that's the impeachment of the Deputy Speaker, Mukhtar Hazo. This development pitched lawmakers for and against the impeachment against themselves, as a vote of no confidence was passed on Mr. Hazo by 24 lawmakers, with the Speaker, Yusuf Zailani, presiding. When calm returned, a member representing Kauru constituency, Mr. Isaac Auta, was elected and sworn in as the new Deputy Speaker.
And as Deputy Speaker of Kaduna State House of Assembly,
I will discharge my duties.
I will discharge my duties
to the best of my ability.
To the best of my ability.
Meanwhile, the Speaker told Channels Television that the impeached deputy was the architect of his own misfortune.
It's just a normal routine in the Assembly. Change happens anytime. And very unfortunate, the members decide to do a vote of no confidence with the Deputy Speaker of the Kaduna State House of Assembly, which I pleaded, but the members say his service is no longer required as a Deputy Speaker of the Kaduna State House of Assembly. And you know, the honorable members, if they say yes, as a leader, you have to follow what they want, not what you want.
The deed has been done, but it's unclear what will happen next concerning the impeached Deputy Speaker in the coming days. However, as it stands, his supporters will need to focus on the business of lawmaking with their colleagues for the good of Kaduna State.
And back here, the nation's capital, Channels Media Group is also lending a hand at effort at cushioning the effect of COVID-19 on the poor and vulnerable, with a donation of 400 bags of rice to the Federal Capital Territory Administration. Receiving the items, the Minister of State for the FCT, Dr. Amuta Aliyu, commended the philanthropic gesture, saying the items will boost the fourth round of the administration's palliative distribution.
Top management staff of Channels Media Group arriving at the Minister's wing at the Federal Capital Territory Development Authority complex. The team brings a truckload of rice, which is meant to be distributed by the FCT administration to the poor and vulnerable in the nation's capital.
It's our pleasure to applaud the efforts of the organization in reaching out to the vulnerable people. It is in identification of this fact that the Channels Media Group wants to partner with you to reach out to the vulnerable, especially within the FCT.
For the Federal Capital Territory Administration, the gesture is coming at the right time as a new set of vulnerable persons have been identified.
I know as easy as we could say the lockdown is eased, it is not easy starting all over. How many days have we been under lock? How many days have we been at home? And yet, even businesses are still skeletal. This will go a long way to cushion this effect and to support families to hold body and soul. Thank you very much. We appreciate.
The FCT administration is set for the fourth phase of distribution of palliatives to the poor and vulnerable in the nation's capital. and the donation by the Channels Media Group is timely to ensure that more households in need of relief materials are reached.
Kudos to the nation's leading broadcaster. Now, Olam Group, a leading food and agribusiness conglomerate, has contributed 1 billion naira in cash and in kind to support the fight against COVID-19 in Nigeria. The group's Vice President, Corporate and Government Relations, Mr. Ade Adefeko, told Channels Television that the gesture is an expression of its commitment to efforts at cushioning the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Olam is an integrated supply chain manager with food supplies ranging from rice, pasta, noodles, eggs, and biscuits, among others.
We said to ourselves it was important to support the indigent and the vulnerable with food relief. So we did that. Secondly, supporting the frontline medical staff was of utmost importance to us. So we donated medical equipment and kits. And thirdly, educational awareness and enlightenment on COVID-19 and its ills was important as well. So it was a three-pronged approach. We supported with 1 billion, but out of that 1 billion, 600 million was in cash, 300 million was for food relief, and 100 million was for medical supplies. The medical supplies went to the likes of the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, NCDC, of course, and the Lagos State government. Because, of course, you know, Lagos is the epicenter of the pandemic. And we supported Kakovid with 600 million naira. Okay? Of course, Kakovid, you know, is the coalition, you know, the private sector coalition against the COVID-19 pandemic. And for us, you know, we operate pan-Nigeria, and the communities where we operate, it was important to make sure that we had enlightenment programs and that spoke to the pandemic and how to curb it.
Business News is next with Melinda Akinlami.
Thanks, Ibrahim. The Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, Mr. Clement Agba, has inaugurated a technical working group for the 2050 Agenda and the Medium-Term National Development Plan of 2021 to 2025. At the virtual inauguration in Abuja, he explains that the National Development Plan will replace the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, which is expected to wind down by December. It's the second day of decline within the week at the Nigerian Stock Exchange after a fresh round of profit taken by investors pushed the stock market's main index and total value lower. Tempo Ashaju tells us more.
Thank you for joining us again on the Stock Market Report. Equities extended declines today by 0.13%, trimming the all-share index to 25,182.67 and the equity capitalization losing some 16.8 billion naira. Now, activity level closed impressive by a 28% jump in volume and 6% rise in value as GT Bank accounted for another round of support in turnover to the tune of 2.09 billion naira. Now, oil and gas stocks suffered the largest decline, while the insurance sector closed as the lone gainer for the session. In all, 17 stocks posted declines, with Curvetin in the lead, while investors remain bullish on the shares of Name-It Pharmaceutical, which leads 15 other companies in price appreciation for the day. And that's your Stock Market Report. I'm Temple Ashaju.
That's Business News. Back to you, Joma.
Thanks a lot, Melinda. Still ahead on the news at 10, U.S. President Donald Trump authorizes sanction against International Criminal Court over court's investigation of American troops in Afghanistan. Plus more stories from our London studio in Around the World in 5. Do stay with us. Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump has authorized economic sanctions and travel restrictions against workers in the International Criminal Court involved in investigating American troops and intelligence officials for positive possible war crimes in Afghanistan without America's consent. Here's Simon Pusey with more international stories in Around the World in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London for your international news around the world in 5. Coronavirus has continued to spread across the world with more than 7 million confirmed cases in 188 countries, despite many countries easing lockdown measures. The number of cases in the United States has now passed 2 million, and infections are still rising in 21 states, even as restrictions continue to be relaxed. Latin America has emerged as the new hotspot for COVID-19 that has killed more than 70,000 people across the region. In Brazil, which accounts for well over half of the deaths in South America, hospitals have been struggling to cope with the increase of deaths. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has said he will hold his first re-election campaign rally for several months in the city of Tulsa in Oklahoma on the 19th of June, the same date that African Americans celebrate the end of slavery.
That's right.
The rallies are seen as vital for energizing his base, but were suspended due to the coronavirus outbreak in March. The Trump campaign, referring to the date of the rally, has said his Republican Party was proud of its role in winning the Civil War and ending slavery. Statues of Confederate leaders and the explorer Christopher Columbus have been torn down in protests across the US. It comes as pressure grows on authorities to remove monuments connected to slavery and colonialism. The civil action has been focused on monuments glorifying countries' imperialist pasts, which are increasingly seen as offensive in modern society. Statues linked to the empire and the slave trade have also been removed in Britain. However, one that was pushed into the harbour by protesters in Bristol a few days ago has been retrieved from the water. The statue of Edward Colston, who was a 17th century English slave trader, will be housed in a museum instead. Amazon has banned the police from using its controversial facial recognition software for a year. The announcement has come as activists have been voicing concern that facial recognition could lead to unjust arrests during demonstrations against police brutality, racial injustice, and the death of George Floyd. Facial recognition technology has long been criticized over potential bias, with studies showing it is more likely to wrongly identify the faces of black people than those of white people. A Norwegian court has sentenced a gunman to 21 years in prison with a minimum term of 14 years for killing his teenage stepsister and opening fire at a mosque. Philip Manshaus killed his stepsister in their family home and later explained it was because of her Asian origins. He then drove to a nearby mosque and fired several shots but hit no one before being overpowered by a 65-year-old member of the congregation who wrestled away his guns. The Guinean president Alpha Condé has declared he is fit and well and would bury many of his enemies, as rumours persisted that his health was deteriorating. Rumours have been circulating widely this week that the 82-year-old, one of Africa's oldest leaders, was being hospitalised. Yet Condé has said he was making fewer public appearances and has stopped receiving visitors on the advice of his doctors due to the coronavirus pandemic. Germany's foreign minister has called for critical dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians as he visited Jordan. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas travelled to Jordan from Israel, where he expressed concern about Israel's plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank, but avoided threatening sanctions. The visit by Maas to Israel and Jordan has come a month before Berlin assumes the European Union presidency, a role which will give Germany great influence in guiding the EU. 300 Venezuelan migrants in limbo in Colombia have finally been allowed to cross the border home amid restrictions at the shared frontier to stop the spread of COVID-19. Colombia has been a lifeline for many Venezuelans fleeing economic collapse back home, but the thousands who once sought a better life in Colombia are now seeking to return to their country amid the uncertainty of the pandemic. According to Colombian migration, between March and May, over 68,000 Venezuelans returned home. And finally, the streets of the Spanish capital Madrid have dressed up in La Liga colours as competitive football returned on Thursday after a 3-month pause. Shirts of Spanish top-tier football clubs hung over a popular shopping street in central Madrid as part of an initiative by the local government aimed at creating anticipation as the league begins in empty stadiums with fans unable to attend. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel Studios in Lagos.
Welcome to Sports News. The federal government has announced that it needs 1 month to assess its current easing of lockdown measures and decide on the resumption of sporting activities like the football leagues. The chairman of the Federation, the Presidential Task Force, on COVID-19, Mr. Abbas Mustafa, said that though fans are central to the excitement in any football game, caution is required with regard to the pandemic.
I don't see the excitement that will be achieved if we allow sporting activities, particularly soccer like the Premier League, to resume in an empty stadium. But for now, we are concerned with the few activities that we have allowed to resume. And we've given ourselves 1 month within which to do a thorough assessment.
The Minister of Youth and Sports Development, Mr. Sunday Dare, has confirmed that the government's plan to fully concession the National Stadium in Surulere, Lagos is ongoing. He says the National Stadium is a sporting infrastructure built by the government and not a shopping mall. And that's it on Sports News. Ijoma, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Olumide. And the main news again. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 today ruled out the possibility of another lockdown in the face of rising cases of coronavirus in the country. And that's the news at 10 tonight. Thanks so much for staying with us. I'm Ijoma Onyato. To stay safe and good night.